Okay. Okay, so good afternoon. Good afternoon for us, of course. Good morning to Rick, and good evening to Asia, of course. We are starting the fourth appointment in the series of four about designing the future. We're still missing one of the participants, which is a little late, but let me start to introduce our host of today, starting from Philip from Cape Town, who is architect and director of the company Saota in Cape Town, a very large architectural practice, very much specialized in residential, but also in many other type of product. Hi, Philip.
Hi, Danilo. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for being with us. Rick Joy, first apologize for getting you out of bed very early this morning, but thanks for being with us. Rick Joy is, of course, director of Studio Rick Joy, which is again a design practice in Tucson, Arizona. That's why it's very early for him this morning, and the reason for being a little, planning this webinar a little bit later than usual. And then we have Luca Guadagnino, who is a film director and also a screenwriter, and he has been also awarded, is Academy Award nominee, but is also an interior designer. This is what many people don't know. Since 2016, he has his own interior design practice in Milan. And we're going to go a little bit to the subject of today, which is designing the future on home and residences. Actually, I would take the advantage, of the fact that Luca is not there yet, maybe to start asking you guys, Philip, starting from Philip. To start, to break the ice, are you still working this day from the office, or from home, or you back to the office? How was this transition during the COVID time?
We still all working from home. In fact, we've been working from home from mid-March. So it was actually well before the official lockdown from our government, and partly because, of course, we take our staff's health very seriously. But also we were lucky, the majority of our projects are abroad, so we're quite used to engaging with consultants and clients, using things like Teams and online conferencing, and also sharing ideas, sketching online, and so on. It's been part of the way we work with our teams. So
hello, I have Luca on the line.
Okay, thank you. So
hey
welcome.
Guys.
Hi, Luca. Thank you for joining us. Welcome. We had
Thank you. You see me? Oh yeah, you can see me.
Yes, we do.
Hello. I am actually talking to you guys from my mix room where I'm mixing my show for HBO. You can see an image of it.
Okay, yes, we know there's something special coming up for HBO soon. So I will ask you a question later. Sorry,
the HBO show. We cannot discuss the topic, but
okay. No, of course, we're not going to ask you about the topic, but maybe you can.
Anyway, let's tell me.
Okay, well, I was speaking to Philip actually about the this experience of working from home, and he was expressing his opinion. How was this experience?
So we found it easier than we had anticipated. In fact, some of our people are saying that they're actually working a little bit harder than they used to, which is quite interesting. We've been working in about 86 countries internationally. So, like I said, it's actually part of the way we work in any case, because we're always on the move. So we use systems like BIM 360 and Microsoft Teams to do this. And then we've got some interesting initiatives. We've been running Design Fridays where we share our work with the whole studio. So, I mean, that's, up to 200 people joining the Teams meeting now every Friday. And then we've also kind of bolstered that with more sessions like Blink sessions, where you just get a glimpse of what people are working on. It's so dynamic and actually quite interesting to see the progress that's happening all over the country, because our teams are really scattered all over the country. So one of the things that I think we miss the most is that back in the office, of course, we've got a proper virtual reality studio, so we can, in Lux Walker, the software that we developed, we can walk around in our projects, and it's added huge value to our projects. Now, at the moment, of course, we're not sharing that space, and we have to do that on our desktops. So it's not quite the same experience, but I think that's one of the main things that we're missing a little bit.
Right. And for you, Rick, how was the situation in Tucson? You enjoyed working from home, or you found it difficult to change, or simple?
No, it's we're of course much smaller than Philip's firm, and we all live much closer together, it's been pretty interesting. I mean, you know, we're all working on our projects and working from home, and we occasionally get together for a stand up outside with masks on meeting to make announcements and check on people and stuff. And but it's working really well. We actually, my firm home base is a small campus of 7 buildings. So there are actually a couple of people who need to do super high powered Revit right now, need to be close to the server to get the speed up. It's kind of slow at home. And then my son is working in the model shop, which is a separate building. And then our office manager and CFO are in the main office every day, 30 feet apart.
Yeah, I remember from when I visited you a couple of years ago already, that, you know, social distancing was already a must in your multiple buildings. So you were already walking distanced.
Yeah, no, it's pretty nice. And, you know, the buildings are made of rammed earth, so it's very healthy and it's fresh air. And but, you know, for me, working from home it's a mixed bag, because I really enjoy the social aspect of having my team and everyone together. And even though we're fairly small now, only 10, we have folks from 6 different countries on our team, and someone from South Africa, Philip, from Durban.
Oh, wow.
Oh, right. Okay.
Durban. And we have Mexico and Vietnam and Austria and Colombia and Chile, South Africa. It's much more fun in person.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And once it comes along and people start calling their families back home, it sounds like an international call center.
Can imagine that.
I just miss that kind of stuff.
Mm.
Well, in the meantime, sorry, but I don't know what happened. I think we lost Luca. The connection was interrupted. So I don't know really. So I'm very sorry about this. Today seems a little bit, yes, now it seems he will be back. Okay, Luca. Yes, we couldn't see you anymore.
I'm back.
Okay, that's good. Today, and you know, different from the previous one that we had some also. We did this experiment of sending some, asking some question to the audience before we started. Actually, I would like to start with you, Luca, if you don't mind. We have a specific question for you, for Luca. So, did the transition from filmmaking to director of Frenzy and working in fashion in general occur naturally? Did this creative crossover also allow for an easier transition into interior design? I think this is an interesting question to explain also your, you know, your background, your transition from one activity to another, and how you are managing those.
Well, honestly, the answer is risks to sound pedantic, and it is that I don't give myself any boundaries or limits to what I enjoy doing and what I like doing. I've been always very much interested in the actual art of making things, whether it's building a scene or conceptualizing a space or an object. And so for me, I guess that since I was aware of what I wanted to do as a person, which is something that happened to me in a very young age, I really didn't thought of myself as someone devoted to only one specific box and then to find a way to get off the box. I prefer to think that I'm a wanderer in a landscape, and I go toward things that I like. When I started the activity of Frenzy being my production company, I did that because I had experienced before I Am Love, the movie I Am Love, the work as a filmmaker, always in the chair of the director, never in the chair of the producer. But because I like to do things and I like to organize things, I understood that much of my work and much of the way in which I could express myself as a filmmaker went through being a producer as well. So I made a production company with a group of people that were fantastic, including the wonderful Silvia Fendi. And after a few years working together, we did I Am Love, we did Suspiria together. I also decided to basically have my own production company where I was the only person to decide in order not to have any excuses for confusion.
And how did you come to interior design?
I actually always been fascinated to that, and I always been hands-on working on spaces in my movies, which I don't think is the same job, honestly. And then I made my own house. I think that was like a bored bourgeois lady. I made my own house. That's how it started. And eventually the T magazine wanted to feature the house in their design issue, and they came and they made pictures of it with the great photographer Michael Holson. And then during the interview, I just said that I wished for myself to be able to do houses for rich clients. That was my little joke. And a client called.
Okay, a rich client, that's a good thing.
And he showed me this very magic space, which was a sort of a former textile factory on the shores of the Lake Como. And he asked me if I felt game on jumping on the thing immediately and design the interiors and the garden of it. And instead of saying, no, I never did that, it's impossible for me, I said yes, in a sort of mindless way. And that's the beginning of it.
That's how it started. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing this.
And Philip, you know, like life gives you always a good opportunities because, and then I let everybody else to talk. Once I started working on the Lake Como project and I hired a couple of young architects that I have met that I like very much, I also was shooting Suspiria, my horror movie. And I was shooting Suspiria on the city of Varese, which was like an hour drive from Como. So basically I was shooting Monday to Friday and working on the construction site Saturday and Sundays for like 4 months. It was very interesting.
Very challenging time, I'm sure. Philip, let's get into a bit more into the subject of today. Have you experienced changes in the way you design your project at Celta since the pre-COVID time? Are clients somehow asking you guys to implement something different from before?
Well, I think we all, our clients and ourselves, are more acutely aware of our homes and in some cases the shortcomings thereof. It hasn't really changed so much, but I'm sure it will very soon, where the importance of things like home offices and so on become very important. You know, I find that you can work wherever you're well connected. So you can work at the kitchen table, you can work in the garden. And so technology plays a key role. Of course, if we had this pre-internet, it would have been a very dismal time for all of us. Sure. And you can imagine the impact that it would have had on the economy. But I think clients most certainly are coming to terms with acoustic challenges. You know, we've always moved towards open plan spaces because you have this feeling of wonderful open spaces. But now people are also realizing that we need to deal with acoustics. You know, you might be having a business meeting while the kids are kind of at school. In your kitchen, you know, yeah. So I think flexibility becomes a key thing, and that's something that's quite interesting and challenging. I think it's also something that we tackle quite three-dimensionally and try and handle it in quite a discrete way so that doors can disappear. So I think it's interesting, and most certainly clients will be much more aware and will be possibly spending more time at their homes. So I think it will change our briefs to a degree.
So these changes are there to stay to some extent.
I think so. We'll see. You know, I think the people are really just kind of realizing the benefit of having a well-designed space, you know, having a home that really works on a practical level, but also obviously has something for the soul and some poetry.
And Rick, what do you think about this subject? Do your client already ask changes from this perspective, or not yet? Or
well, not yet. I mean, I bring up my own ideas. I think, you know, establishing a great place to do a Zoom meeting with a better backdrop than this, and you know, we'll probably have little stages in all of our homes now. And the acoustic idea that Philip was talking about, it's really true, because, you know, Claudia, I mean, she does these kind of calls a lot from 3 rooms away, and we can still hear each other doing it. Right. And just before we
yeah, for the audience, Claudia is your wife and is a fantastic lighting designer.
The best in the world.
So we should explain to the audience, because probably they don't know. So when you refer to Claudia,
yeah, I tried to get her to have her face here, but she wouldn't. But you know, I think the interesting part of all of this is that we've already been adapting. You know, I haven't done a home office on a client's house in 10 years because of what Philip was saying. You know, there's you can sit at the couch, you can sit out in the garden, and you can have a board and sit on your bathtub and get work done, real work done. And then, you know, in most of the work that we've done here at our office, we've reached out to try to find as much nature in every space possible. And so what's been really great at being home is finding the you know, I'm always leaving early in the morning and coming back late at night. So I didn't get to experience all the great stuff that goes on here. We have 2 baby hummingbirds in a little nest outside one window. And a month ago, 4 kittens were born in our garden from some feral cat. And just the quality of light and watching the movement and everything's been really great. But in terms of clients and what they need, I think we've already been sort of adapting as humans, right? With laptops and cell phones, and you can work on the subway and you can work on your bed. And so thank goodness we're ready for this, because like Philip was saying, you know, that 30 years ago, if this happened, what would we do? You know? Yeah,
would be it's been challenging already now. I can imagine 30 years ago would have been really tough.
So it's just telephones, you know, like ringing telephones and stuff.
Yes, dialing. So, Luca, I imagine that, well, I would like to hear your opinion about this, but also maybe we can relate it also to a more technological part, you know, like technology, which has taken a central part in our lives. And are we integrating enough technology in the new houses that would allow us to, you know, to find a proper place to live and work for the future?
That's an important topic that has been raised in really in the last few months for me, because before, when we were conceiving spaces for clients who wanted to have like a holiday home, that for them was a great place to run away from everything and be in a specific, unique place. The goal was to make it really technology free somehow. That was the ultimate luxury. And in this world and scenario, which we didn't predict a pandemic, probably that would have been problematic, right? The good news is that the technology is something that we are completely accustomed with. And it is something not complicated to implement in an environment. I am fascinated by what Rick said, like to create mini conference rooms within the larger spaces of private residence. That's something very interesting. And I guess that there will be designers that are wonderful that will create spaces for the ages. The way in which, for instance, when you enter a great place built in the 50s, you find the little niches in the kitchen that now we don't use anymore, or the way in which like a pantry or a laundry can be fantastic in the design of mid-century America, right? So this will be a sort of a signifier of our times that will go on and on for a long time. I still believe that despite the fact that during this pandemic, I had worked 3 times than the time I work normally, because when you can Zoom, people abuse of your availability to Zoom. And also technology helped me to finish my show and conclude design work and stuff in telematic ways. I still believe the best is always not to be connected, and truthfully to be disconnected. And I think that an holistic relationship with this connection is something that would be the ultimate way for me.
Yes, well, very interesting perspective. Of course, technology has been helping us through this difficult time. But Philip, do you think that technology, are we abused by technology, or do we abuse technology? How do you see that related to a residential project? How's with all the top of the technology nowadays? Something that you see more like a gimmick, or it's really something that we need?
Well, I think to answer the first part of the question, I do think we need to manage our boundaries, you know, because we kind of never leave work at the moment. And in an office environment, one can intuitively quickly see that someone has a gap and ask a question, and one can sense that maybe it's not the right time to have that discussion, you know. So at the moment, we find ourselves, or I find myself, literally starting calls in the morning and only ending late in the evening. So my kids think that's my job, is to talk all the time. And, you know, that's unfortunate, but we obviously need to control that and manage that ourselves. In terms of the houses and the technology that we put in there, I think it needs to be sensible, you know, and simplify the way we live and really enhance it. So you know, we mentioned earlier that there are all kinds of things happening around the kitchen table. You know, you could have a family Zoom call, you do homework, you do school projects, you do work, you eat, you know. And obviously from a lighting perspective, you need a different quality of light, different intensities. And of course, this technology makes it possible to very quickly switch between those various functions, you know. So I think that there's definitely a role for technology to play. The key for me is simplicity and flexibility, because then you can use spaces in different ways, and it just gives you a wider platform to use your spaces in different ways, because it's all of this is unprecedented, and we never saw it coming. But you're lucky if you have systems that's really quite easy to use. And
Rick, what is your opinion about the use of technology in residential projects? Have you already applied this extensively, or?
Well, I'm old enough to have been around and in business when the first smartphone came out, and they tried to apply it to lighting controls, and then a year later that phone was obsolete, and we had to go in and change all the systems and everything. And but I've always been sort of a old guy in a young guy's body, not anymore, but in the past. And I think the virtues of standing up and going over to a light switch is pretty nice. You know, you get a little movement and opening your own curtains. And I've had so far in my career, most of my clients have been much older. And they're, you know, insisting on a toggle or just a basic rocker switch and no other controls. But what's happening these days is I'm getting many more young clients. So I'm really interested to see how they're going to request technology more. And I'm thinking mostly about light switching and all of that. And I just think it's kind of just a nice energy to stand up and go turn on the light. And we do a lot of plug-in lamps versus cans, as you know. And the beauty of side light coming from on the side of your face from a lampshade on a table is much richer than sort of high-tech cans and strips of light and thing. And I have another philosophy about lighting and technology, in that I just only I insist that we only light the life in a building, not the building. No lighting of the building ever. and so no coves and all of those kind of things. And I just think the way we like to live and feel comfortable and everything really hasn't changed in the whole course of time. Some people like things to be very bright, usually the older people and the young people. And I like to have everything fairly dim and very atmospheric and kind of cool and sexy. And I'm just willing to embrace technology at every moment, but I just think some of it's not necessary. Standing up and moving around and adjusting your environment is kind of a good thing.
I know that you are also still a big fan of candlelight, so I can understand this from your descriptions.
Candles and fire, but in Tucson, when it's 110 degrees, it's kind of hard to have a candle.
Yeah, of course, I can understand that.
They just melt.
Luca, all three of you are living in or very close to larger city urbanization areas. So you're in Milan, Philip is in Cape Town, and Rick is in Tucson. So public space is an important part of our lives. So our homes are becoming more as a safe retreat. Do you think that, how would you see the future of our public spaces and neighborhoods adding value to our lives? And how do you see that related to the construction of new residential building?
Let me just conclude what Rick said, that I couldn't agree more with him. Like I agree with him. The act of standing up and moving toward switching the light is fantastic, and there is no remote control that can change that for better. Anyway, I mean, I think it depends on the places, right? Because, like if you go into Northern Europe, the cities are already very intensely made into places where the public life is almost more important than the private life, right? If you go in a place like Copenhagen or Oslo, you can see in the good season, for instance, that the exteriors of the cities are the places most lived in by the inhabitants of the cities, and the average lives in smaller houses and that are more like places where they go at the end of the day. But even in the winter, thinking of very beautiful public constructions that the northern country of Europe they endorses, it really depends on the places. I, for one,
let's say Milano, which is your hometown. How do you see that related to Milano?
Well, Milano, it's interesting because there is not anymore a true strength coming from the bourgeoisie who has been ruling Milan for the 20th century onwards, for the duration of 20th century, second half of 20th century. Right now, I think the best and most interesting aspect of Milano is how places like Nolo and Città Studi, everything that is off the center and beyond even that, is where you can see a beautiful way of younger people interacting with the older inhabitants of the neighborhoods and really taking over the actual exteriors of the city and making it alive and bright and futuristic by being completely connected with the roots of the place. Again, Nolo is a fantastic place in this regard. The center of Milano is a little bit museum-like and it's a sort of I mean, I love it, but it's a sort of badge of honor of a ruling class that doesn't rule anything anymore and doesn't really commit to give us any real source of indication for something. If you think of Brera in the 50s and after the war and Bar Jamaica and all the intellectuals that were really broodingly building the idea of our Italy, it's no more, and all these shops and stores and luxury stores and minor luxury stores that are taking over what at the time where, let's say, the bottega of these places is just depressing like everywhere else in the world. Can we say that when you walk in Milano, you peek into a courtyard and you see the beauty garden? Sure, we love it. Is it fascinating, interesting, can tell you about the sense of the future or the present? No, it doesn't. But if you move forward outside, you'll see something fantastic and bright and beautiful in the beauty of these kids taking over and really taking over, not in an aggressive way, but in an holistic way again.
Thank you. And Philip, what is your opinion about it? You live in Cape Town, in Africa, in a different continent. So is that different?
So we most certainly, I think if I think just talking about COVID, I think when we start re-engaging with public spaces, of course the outdoor public spaces would be more popular just for practical reasons. And I think that's actually quite exciting. You know, in Cape Town, we're a little bit behind, say, Europe in terms of the way we use our public spaces. And for me, that's actually quite exciting because it could reactivate our streets. You know, one could even assume that maybe public transport would be used less frequently, so people would walk. And I'm very excited about that, you know, for Cape Town, because Cape Town, and really we need the activity on the street. We need the public surveillance. We'd like to activate those streets, and maybe this is a great opportunity as we move back out of isolation. That we actually start with the outside spaces, having events there, because I think people would be relatively comfortable with that. In terms of indoor activities, larger public activities, one can imagine that they'll have to take care of things like ventilation, obviously, try and avoid touching of surfaces. So the way we interact with doors and so on, on a very practical level. But I think what really excites me is the fact that we have an opportunity to now re-engage really and spend time outside the cafes on the street, you know, and I think there's a vibrancy there. That's quite exciting.
It's a new opportunity, Rick.
Exactly.
How do you see that related to your part of the world?
Well, you know, like Philip said, we're pretty far behind. However, Tucson was developed in, you know, mid-century, mostly. I mean, the modern Tucson. And so there are plenty of parks. There's kind of modeled on the Mexican influenced plaza, like a square park. And people go there, and most of ours are set up with built-in exercise equipment, like rings and bars and monkey bars and stuff. And people do that pretty regularly. And but interestingly, like the demonstrations that we've been having have been right in the city, right in downtown next to City Hall. So that's a new aspect of public space now. And it's going to go on for a long time until we get some things figured out. But, you know, I travel a lot. And that's the difference this year. I haven't traveled it at all. And by last year, I think I flew 275,000 miles. No. Yeah.
I've beaten you. I did 440,000. So.
Yeah, no, that's a lot. It's hard to live like that, you know. It's puts on a
bad.
It is. It is bad.
It's one of the great things is that I get to experience, you know, the piazzas in Rome and Milan and public spaces in Paris and Austria, of course, Claudia. But and I bring that back, and it's like trolling the world for the good stuff that people have done for centuries. And for example, on our Princeton project, we have a transit hall and a transit piazza, basically two of them. And it's all from my memory of the great experiences I've had in Europe. And so we're kind of a country built on borrowing from and using our Europe envy to help us design better.
Okay. As I said at the beginning, we have some specific question for our guest. I asked Luca, you know, to break the ice with a question for him personally. And now I have one for Philip. What is the future of African architectural languages with the rise of sustainable approaches?
Well, I think to start off with, we've all learned to listen better. You know, the inherent knowledge in our continent is so remarkable. So when you talk about the built environment, we nowadays start first by trying to learn from the success that's coming from the vernacular architecture. And I think there's a whole world there for us to still discover. And our role as contemporary architects is to learn and reinterpret and improve where we can. But you know, the most remarkable technologies are actually quite simple, and it comes from the ground and the people who's lived there for many ages. So I think there's a huge opportunity to grow. I'm not sure it's so much a stylistic or language thing. I think it needs to be specific to places. You know, the cultures vary, the climates vary on our continent so drastically. You know, if you take even Cape Town compared to West Africa, Senegal, where we do quite a lot of work, you know, Niger, these places all have very specific responses to climate, but also to culture. And if you don't understand that, it's very hard to come and impose something. And I do think the days of coming there and, you know, saying, this is, we giving you the solution, they're probably over. You know, I think we need to learn a lot more from what's around us.
And Luca, talking about sustainability, do you see any specific trends of evolution in material, in construction techniques happening in your project? Of course, in home design, is this gaining some importance nowadays or not yet?
It is imperative. Of course, the very important aspect is not what we do inside, but how you do the inside. You know, that would be the ultimate goal. Because, for instance, we always tend to work with extremely natural material, with sourcing the most exquisite quality material that is also conscious in terms of the environment, because honestly that's the best you can get in terms of the touch, the smell, the feel of it, right? But maybe sometimes the house itself doesn't have the same bones, and that's something that hopefully doing more, having more, let's say, respect for what I do, maybe we'll be able to manage also the way in which you work on the actual bones of the building, because sometimes we are asked to intervene before the house is finished, but not with the degree of intervention we can navigate the way the house itself is built. But for our work, for wall coverings or like whatever, boiserie, or for furniture and anything that is on the, let's say, conclusion of the project, we do tend to work mostly with very environmental conscious materials, because we found them the best.
And
there
Rick,
is nothing that can change the quality of a great wood, for instance, that is sourced as something very consciously.
Thank you. And Rick, what is your opinion about, do you see new trends in terms of new material that can help us achieve this sustainability?
Well, you know, I've always been very committed to communing with the building culture of a place. And most of the buildings I've done here in Tucson are made of earth. In fact, I mentioned my office complex before, and there's 2 adobes and 4 compacted earth buildings. And I just, I find that connection to be just really it's stimulating on so many levels. To build a building out of dirt is just a thrill beyond. But then when I get to Vermont, you know, the building culture of place, the wisdom I can learn from, I grew up there, and to make a house of wood and shingles is just as much of a thrill. Or in building Amangiri, the hotel we did, out of concrete, and the stimulation there was to build the mesas and the mountains there were all eroded by wind, water, and sand. And so we made a concrete hotel, same color as the rocks, that's eroded by program. And I really enjoy tapping into these kind of connections to place and materiality. And I encourage you all to take a look at this. There's a young architect who's the dean or director at Berkeley, UC, who's up in the North Central Americas building with 3D printed adobe. And it's pretty fascinating. He's working his way up in scale. And I can't wait to get up there and see that, because it's the forms he's making are beautiful. And the idea is super high tech 3D printing with dirt. And it just stimulates me beyond. And so in terms of new materials, it's hard to beat wood and dirt and concrete and all those materials that make you feel good. I don't do much with plastic, and sustainability starts from the ground up. We've done a number of projects completely off the grid. In fact, I just visited one of my clients who's been off the grid water too, harvesting water for 18 years in a rammed earth house that we did for him. And it takes a pretty strong individual to get that done, but he's doing it, and it's beautiful to watch. And I've been just doing it, not talking about it that much. I just think we have a responsibility as architects to just do it. And I don't use it as any marketing energy for my firm or the work that we do. I just do it. And it's kind of like my dad used to say, just do it and stop talking about it.
Yes, so just do it and the client will follow.
Yeah. Well, no, it's not that hard to convince somebody to be 100% off grid, especially in Arizona or Idaho or Napa. It's sunny all the time in these places. And
yeah, thank you.
Another aspect is to manage materials already used, recycle great wood planks or great stones instead of sourcing new. That's another way that is great.
So give a new life to something which had a previous one.
Yeah.
And Philip, a question about lighting. Do you see the integration of lighting to change in the post-COVID time from what it was before?
Not necessarily so much. I think COVID has.
It can be artificial lighting, can be not necessarily artificial, also natural light. Using natural light also.
Of course. No, I think we in the work that we're doing, obviously we try and harvest as much daylight as we can, and our projects try and take advantage of that. Obviously, trying to also be quite energy conscious and not allowed to lead to heat gain. But I think in terms of lighting, we like this idea that lighting is a little bit more flexible, that you can really control the lighting. I mean, we spoke earlier about everything that happens around the kitchen table, and I think that's quite exciting, and just that little bit of flexibility might be something that becomes more of an issue as we move forward, because people are using spaces in various different ways, different to what they're used to, especially if it's small spaces. I think that's exciting, and being able to change things to make it work for you. I think that's possibly the one thing that we'll take away from COVID in terms of lighting.
Hey, and Luca, what is your opinion about this? Do you see a change in the way the lighting should be used? Because of course, lighting for a home should be cozy. Lighting for an office should be keep you very alert. So there is this sort of difference. And of course, building home offices within the house create this sort of paradox.
I agree with Rick. The light should come very close to where you are and just be devoted to what you're doing, where you're doing it. Honestly, I have never made an office, meaning I never worked on creating a space beyond the private office of an owner of a house. I never did offices. So I honestly am not into that kind of difference. In general, light should be very well thought of as we do, and it should be very kind as a source, I think this pandemic, we are into it, and I don't think that is the time to do a sort of balance where we stand, what happens, what's gonna happen next. I feel like like I've been throughout Italy for the last few weeks. If you go to Sicily or you go to Campania, you see people behaving really like as if this never happened, because those places weren't very much hit. So the consciousness has not changed much. If you go to Lombardy, you see a completely different approach to the everyday life of people. But generally speaking, I'm not sure I can make a sort of synthesis of what's gonna happen next and how things change it, particularly in the term of how we use light or not. For me, it's just about making a usage of light that creates a space that makes you feel bad. Sorry, good, not bad. The opposite, feel very, very good. Whether it's something about how the light comes into the room from outside or how you lit the room after the daylight has gone.
Create a sort of experience with the environment that makes you feel, at ease with the space. Rick, I ask you the question too, because of course you have a wife who is a light guru. So
Light, she's standing right here. She just heard you.
Can we say hi?
Can we say hi to her? Can we say hi to Claudia?
Yeah.
Hi, Claudia.
Hello, Claudia.
Hi, guys. Lovely conversation.
Thank you.
Interrupt. It's live, so back to the main act.
So don't give any suggestion now. We want to hear Enrico viewpoint.
Well, I mentioned before my long-standing philosophy of lighting life, not the building. And, that came through from in architecture school, wandering the streets at night, trying to clear my head and walking by houses and just seeing the light inside a home, all the homes, and they're all different colors. One's blue blinking because somebody's watching a football game, and another one's all warm because they're making dinner and lighting candles. And I just appreciate that energy and feeling in a neighborhood. And so then suddenly you come upon a house where they're uplighting all the trees and they've got rope lights underneath the eaves and all that stuff. And it's like Las Vegas. And it turns me off quite a bit, to the point where the lighting we did even at the Princeton train station is only inside the building, and some street lights some distance away. So the coloration of the light on the wood radiating out from the building is just beautiful and stimulating. And that's just one of the feelings I have about it. And we also almost always have a connection to the night sky. I call it the celestial connection. So a lot of the bedrooms we've done have a little light that you can see the stars through, and we're trying to work on projects these days with circadian rhythm in mind, and Claudia's excellent at that technology of trying to make that happen with electric lighting. And so I don't see, I'm the kind of person that will be always looking back to what really worked. Cyber cafes, when they came out in the 90s, you still want to slouch in a chair and have a nice warm light next to you. It doesn't need to have, bling because it's a cyber cafe, which we don't have anymore. That lasted like 3 years. I don't know, I'm drawn to, I don't want to keep sounding like the old guy in the room, but I'm drawn to what has worked for throughout the course of time.
Yeah, it's not the absolute pursuit of new technology if we are happy with what we have. It's, what we said before also with Philip, I think.
Some of the new technology is pretty fantastic. I mean, the lighting that Claudia did on our house on Long Island, the wall washing, what brand was that? Zoomtobo, beautiful. Sorry, it wasn't Delta. Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It is
but
a free conversation.
But it washes the wall perfectly from that crack by the ceiling and the wall to the floor with minimal shadows from the photography on the wall. And I think some technology gets away from us. You go to a museum and you see these multi-LED lights and there's 1,000 shadows coming off the side of the painting. It's all very jittery. But I think we're coming around and getting better single LEDs and rather than these multiple ones, which makes our environment much more relaxed and calm in this past 10 years of the multi-point LEDs.
Great.
And I'm going over my boundaries here because Claudia's standing right next to me, and you know like 1,000 times more about this than I do.
Okay, so before we go to the last round of question to conclude, this nice conversation, I have asked Philip his dedicated question. I asked Luca his dedicated question. Rick, very quickly, we have a question for you. How does, if it does, the hospitality industry currently influence residential design? If it does.
You're asking me?
Yes. It's the question from the audience for you.
Well, I do think that there's a nice thing starting up, and there's a couple of companies in the United States that do CNC milled lumber packages or steel packages and all. And it's so fun because you can just show up with everything cut to place, and the people on site there's no circular saws and there's no hammers and all that stuff. Their tool belts even look different because they're using wrenches to put a house together. And we did this on our house in Long Island, and it's really amazing to see that fall into place so quickly. And as we advance as humans, we want everything faster. And my clients that are older want everything faster. It's like you can see the goalposts and you only have 10 yards to go, so you better get it done fast, right? And I see that's really strong, and it's super stimulating for me, to the point where I think I'm pushing my son, who's in architecture school, to think about construction technology as maybe a path, because it's where everything's going to skyrocket.
Great, thank you. So now we wrap up, with a final thought or final message with you guys that you want to share with the audience, but also if you can at the same time tell us something exciting that we can expect from your work in the future. We start from Luca. We don't want, we cannot disclose too much about this HBO new series coming up. So we know that it's coming.
We can sell it. We can say that it's coming up.
Well, that's what we look forward to that. But at the same time, what else can we expect from you in the future that we can tell about? And a final message to the audience.
Well, I think that what you can expect from me is more movies and more TV shows and hopefully more interior design for retail and private housing. I can say to the audience, I think that despite the terrible 6 months behind us, you should dare, as I do there.
Okay, so great. Thank you very much, Luca. And Philip?
Well, from my side, I want to echo the optimism from Luca's side. We're really looking forward to an exciting year and getting out of this and learning from this and improving from here. We've got some also top secret projects, but we've got quite a few that's quite exciting that we haven't done before. So we're busy with a very tall tower in Senegal at the moment, and even a resort in what could be described as a baobab forest outside of Dakar, which is really interesting. And then a while ago, we won a competition for a house on the Lake of the Seine. And it was such an interesting brief because the client really didn't want a house, they wanted a park. Instead of like a house with a garden around it. And that's really coming to life now. So we're working with Piet Oudolf there, great landscape architect. So that's actually nearing completion towards the end of next year. And then I think we also find it quite interesting when we start working in new environments. So we've recently started working in Brazil. We've got a potential new project in Finland that we're looking at now. And then of course, China, after all of this is waking up again, and we're seeing quite a few large projects coming out of especially Shenzhen. So really exciting things coming up.
Great things. And a message to the public for the future: positiveness.
Positive?
Optimism, I think so. And then let's try and, I think we in Cape Town, we're seeing such interesting things with birds returning into our urban environments. and let's try and make things greener. You know, I think the biodiversity in our cities during this time has been remarkable. You know, in Cape Town, we've seen caracoles coming in and otters swimming upstream, coming much closer to where they normally used to. You know,
nature is gaining back.
Exactly, but isn't that exciting? You know, we've got clients who's harvesting their own honey. You know, so I think if we can try and restore a little bit of that balance, you know, we haven't been able to achieve that through all these environmental treaties or anything like that. So in a funny way, COVID's definitely taught us something there, and let's try and take that on board.
Great, thank you. And Rick, what can we expect from you? What could we look forward to? And a final message again.
Well, I think what you can look for from me and my firm and my team is just to continue to embrace authenticity. It's hard to say. And what I'm really striving for and looking forward to, hopefully, is to do much more public work. And 2 projects recently, the townhouses in Polanco, Mexico City, right in an urban setting, surrounded on 3 sides by other buildings, and still being able to bring nature into every space was a total thrill. And then making the train station at Princeton University and thinking about all the people. One of the last things that that Michael Graves did was go through that station. And Obama's been through there, and 22 couples have been married there. It's such a thrill to be able to think publicly like that and give back, give to thousands of people a day versus a couple someplace, which is still also a thrill. But I think you can expect that someday you'll see some more of that kind of work from us.
Thank you. So we've been longer than expected today, but the conversation was so nice that I didn't want to stop. I would like to continue, but of course there is an end also to the most beautiful thing. So we will have to thanks everybody for being with us today. And thank you to our guests, to Luca Guadagnino, to Philip Fouché, and Rick Joy. Thank you for being with us. Thank you to those who had the patience to listen to our conversation. And Deltalight has been planning also to be back with more of this webinar from September on. We will have a monthly, recurrence and with new subject. So we're very happy that we had this series of 4. It went very well. I think that it was very interesting to exchange opinion with everybody. So thank you all. Enjoy your time. Stay safe. And Rick, keep my Averna bottle ready, because one day I will end up in Tucson again. So
well, you know what? I wanted to tell you this, but I don't know about online, but I was in that restaurant, Maynard's. And, and I personally went and bought that bottle and gave it to the bartender. It's still there with only your small amount missing.
Okay, great. So I'll be coming there. So
it's good to see your face again.
Okay, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip and Luca.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Take care. All the best to everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.